All right, so welcome back. We're going to start in on the stomach itself. So basically, as we've talked about, right, you take food in your mouth, you swallow, it goes down the esophagus, and then into the stomach. And then the stomach has three different layers of muscles. So there's a longitudinal layer, there's a circular layer, but then there's a third layer. There's an oblique layer, so the muscle fibers are running at an angle. And this is going to be really important because there's a lot of mechanical digestion that's also occurring in the stomach. So again, remember, mechanical is just breaking the food into like smaller pieces. But there's also chemical digestion of protein and fat that's beginning here. So it's going to be really important that the stomach is able to churn all of that food that you ate so that the different enzymes and acids can actually break it down into a soupy mixture that we call chyme. Okay. In red here, it says it does not absorb significant amount of nutrients. I think that I don't know, I think we intuitively think it does, but it does not. So it's just really a site for to begin the digestion of food. However, you are not absorbing nutrients. Mostly because the inner lining of the stomach is going to have a very thick layer of mucus protecting it from the stomach acids. So when you have a thick layer of mucus, it's really hard to absorb anything. Now, some things will get across, things like aspirin and lipid-soluble drugs, because they can just pass through the mucus. However, again, most things do not. Okay, so just take a quick look at the anatomy. When it's empty, it's about the size of a large sausage. And then you can see all the rugae. Those are the folds in the stomach. So basically, the rugae are there for extra surface area. So when you eat, it allows the stomach to expand. Right? And then we have the different parts of the stomach. There's the cardia, which is right after that esophageal sphincter. There's the fundus of the stomach, this top part of the stomach right here. The body, which is the vast majority of the stomach. And then you have the pylorus, really, which is this entire area that consists of the pyloric antrum, the pyloric canal, and the pyloric sphincter. So it's not just this area; it's really all of this, basically from this curve onward. And then you can see it narrows as it approaches that sphincter. You have the smaller curve that's called the lesser curvature of the stomach, and then this larger curve along the outside is called the greater curvature of the stomach. Okay, so basically what's going on, right, again, you've eaten food, the stomach is releasing different digestive enzymes, it's churning. Some of the food will end up in the fundus, little bits of it will break off, it goes into the body, kind of swishes back and forth between the body and the pylorus. And then a little bit of the sphincter, like the sphincter open a little bit, and then a little bit of the chyme will leave the stomach through the pyloric sphincter into the duodenum. And the duodenum is the first part of that small intestine. And again, another piece of fundus, another piece of the food in the fundus will break off, get into the body again, churn, and then a little bit like kind of blurps out. Okay. Take a look at these two videos. One is simply of the stomach and how food passes through the stomach. It'll give you a nice view of exactly that kind of churning. And the other video is going to be of vomiting and what that actually looks like via x-ray. So both of these are in animals, or I think they're both in dogs. But still, you get an idea seeing like how the stomach actually moves during regular digestion as well as vomiting. Okay, stomach's a very important organ, right? Based on the shape of our stomach, and part of our digestive tract is gonna determine what we can eat. So what you're seeing here, for example, here's a cow. It's eating its grass, and you'll see the green arrow, right? Is the first sort of stage. Swallows the grass, and there's this large chambered stomach here. In this large chambered stomach is just basically what it is. It's a giant vat of like liquids and bacteria. And the bacteria is what's going to help the cow break down all the cellulose found in grass. Because remember, there's very little that's in grass, and we wouldn't be able to digest that very well at all. After it's spent some time in the first part of that stomach, it actually will travel to the second part of the stomach, right in here. It will actually be regurgitated. The cow will chew it some more, add some more uric acid to that, and then re-swallows it. So re-swallows it. It goes into this part of the stomach, and then another part of the stomach, again, all along the way processing with bacteria, the bacteria breaking it down, and then it passes through the rest of the small intestine and then the large intestine. Very specialized for eating grass. If you ever look at the difference between like a cow poop versus horse poop, you'll see that cow poop is very digested. You can't tell that it was once grass. It's just like a splat. Versus horse poop that you can still see the individual blades of grass even. Okay, and again, this is all on the side. I'm just kind of letting you know. This image that you're seeing here is a vampire bat. So here's the head, the wings. So here's the esophagus, and it's got this really odd-looking stomach. So this is the actual stomach here, very long, and basically that's because obviously these animals drink blood, so it's a very specialized stomach to be able to hold on to a lot of liquid, and then actually process that liquid very quickly as well. So they don't just bloat up like little ticks. And then down here, what you're looking at is basically your standard sort of bird stomach. Birds have a two-part stomach. There's this first part, the proventriculus, and then a gizzard. The proventriculus is going to be the part that secretes enzymes, and the gizzard is very tough. It's actually, well, I don't know, very tough. They'll have like little pebbles in there, even like little grains of sand for smaller birds that'll help grind up the seeds that they're eating and any other kind of tough material. So again, diet will influence the shape of the stomach, and the shape of the stomach will influence what kind of diet you can eat. So innervation, its stomach is innervated by parasympathetic fibers that come from the vagus nerve. You guys should hopefully remember that from 201, the vagus nerve. And then the sympathetic fibers are coming from the celiac plexus. And then all the blood from the stomach enters into the hepatic portal circulation. Basically what that means is blood leaving the stomach is going to go through the liver before returning to the heart so it can get filtered. Okay, so in case sort of anything is in it, the liver will help detox it. And you should remember too, right? You have that celiac trunk, and then you have the gastric artery going to the stomach. Okay. You'll see this in lab as well. So just take a quick review of the histology of the stomach. So you have the same layers we saw before. You have the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosa. So the mucosa layer will have simple columnar epithelium, lamina propria, as well as these gastric glands. You'll see these gastric pits as well. In the lamina propria, you may see those malts, those lymphatic tissues. And then here's that muscularis mucosae. That is where the boundary of the mucosa is. Underneath that is submucosa, and blood vessels in there, areolar connective tissue. And then again, in the stomach, you have three different layers of muscles, the oblique, circular, and then longitudinal before the actual connective tissue outer wrapping. Okay. That's what a gastric pit looks like in like a high-powered microscope image. So just so you know. So what's actually in these, oops, sorry, that's my phone beeping. What's actually in these gastric pits? Well, so those are the openings to gastric glands. We have a few cells that are involved in these gastric glands. So the first cells close to the surface are mucus cells. They secrete mucus. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to have a nice thick coating of mucus in the stomach to help protect it from the digestive enzymes that it's producing. Okay, you have new cells that are always rapidly dividing to produce new cells. They're going to migrate from the bottom to the top, or from in out. This is going to be very important because, again, you can imagine that there's a great bit of turnover in these cells. Parietal cells, these secrete hydrochloric acid and something called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is going to be very important in proper red blood cell formation. And then chief cells, you can see those are in the pink here. They secrete something called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is the inactive form of pepsin. So once pepsin encounters hydrochloric acid, it's going to be changed, like its shape will change, and it'll be in the active form, which is pepsin. But just be very clear about this on an exam. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen. Okay, they do not secrete pepsin. They can't. If they're secreting the active form, they basically digest themselves. You may know chymosin by a different name. It's also called renin, R-E-N-N-I-N. So the chymosin or the renin, it's basically going to cause milk to curdle in the stomach. Okay, and that's going to be very important in aiding the digestion of milk. And gastric lipase, it really does not do much in adults. So it works best at a pH of around 5 or 6. And again, in the adult stomach, the pH is usually around 2. So the gastric lipase does not work very well in adults. However, in basically babies, in infants, their pH of their stomach is slightly different. So this lipase and the chymosin are going to work predominantly in infants to help break down milk, which is, an infant's main source of nutrition. So early on in life, you have got a couple of extra enzymes here that are going to help digest that milk, right? Which again is a predominant food type, less important as you get older. And then G cells, so you can see these G cells here. These are going to secrete some hormones that act as paracrine messengers. And what a paracrine messenger is simply a hormone that acts on another cell very close to the cell that secreted it. So in other words, it doesn't travel very far. A paracrine hormone is simply going to affect the cells around the cell that secreted it. Okay, so one of the things that G cells secrete is something called gastrin, and this gastrin is going to help stimulate parietal and chief cells and increase the movement of the stomach. So there's lots of gastric secretions that occur. You're producing about 2 to 3 liters of gastric juice a day. That's going to consist of water, hydrochloric acid, and then pepsin or pepsinogen. And basically the way that this is going to function or how you're actually producing the hydrochloric acid. Just take a look at this image. You should be familiar with this equation. We've seen it before. So you have water and carbon dioxide, and in the presence of carbonic anhydrase will form our carbonic acid. That carbonic acid quickly dissociates into hydrogen ions as well as bicarbonate ions. Now those hydrogen ions are going to be pumped out of the cell actively using ATP. And then these bicarbonate ions are going to be moved out of the cell while chloride ions are moved into the cell. This is basically going down a concentration gradient. And so now you have the chloride, so now and then the chloride will leave the cell again due to concentration gradients. You have hydrogen, you have chloride, that's how you make hydrochloric acid. So similarly, these parietal cells are not making the hydrochloric acid inside of themselves because again, they self-digest. Instead, they're separately pumping out hydrogen and chloride. Okay. Now, one of the things that's important here is this movement of this bicarbonate in exchange for chloride is called the chloride shift. Okay. And because you are, especially like when your body is getting ready to digest something, like you've just eaten or you're getting ready to eat, you're going to start producing lots of hydrochloric acid in your stomach. You produce so much of this bicarbonate that it actually temporarily causes your blood pH to increase. Like it's a very short little increase if you kind of are measuring this with like a pH meter, and they call that the alkaline tide. It's sort of like for a temporary bit, your blood goes a little bit alkaline, but then it quickly, your body regulates that and it goes back to normal. So what does hydrochloric acid do? Well, again, it activates the pepsinogen, right? It turns it from the inactive pepsinogen into the active pepsin. It activates the lingual lipase. Remember we said that the lingual lipase works best at a pH of about 2. It helps break up the connective tissues and plant cell walls, right? It's forming that chyme. It'll actually convert ferric ions to ferrous ions, and these can then be absorbed and used in making new red blood cells. Helps destroy bacteria pathogens. Again, a pH of 2 is a very low acidic pH. It kills quite a bit of things, not everything, but quite a bit. Okay, so those are the basic functions of hydrochloric acid, very important to us. Other chemical digestion in the stomach. So again, protein digestion is going to begin here. So hydrochloric acid is going to denature protein molecules. So basically by denaturing them, it's altering their physical structure permanently. Again, it's going to transform pepsinogen into pepsin. And then basically fat digestion will continue. As I mentioned to you, this gastric lipase is going to help break down milk fat, again, most important in an infant's stomach. Again, kills microbes. And again, you have that nice thick mucus layer to help protect your stomach. Okay. Again, stomach does not absorb much. Some fat-soluble things like alcohol, and aspirin, things like that, but really no food. That's going to be the job of the intestines, is to absorb broken down food. All right, so how do we regulate these secretions? We have 3 different phases that we regulate them. There's something called the cephalic phase, the gastric phase, and then the intestinal phase. All right, in the cephalic phase, if you look, it's sensory and mental input. I'm sure we've all had the experience where you're hungry and you smell something really good and you can actually feel your stomach churning. You're like, oh, right? Because basically the vagus nerve, you smell it, it sends impulses to the brain, and the vagus nerve says, all right, we're near food, we're getting ready to eat. So before food hits like a totally empty stomach, your stomach's going to start producing the digestive enzymes that are necessary to break it down. Okay, so basically the sight, smell of food is going to start causing the stomach to produce the acids. Okay, so it'll, even before the food is swallowed. Now in the gastric phase, basically food is going to stretch the stomach and it activates, remember, the myenteric reflex. So this will stimulate gastric secretions, so secretions of the stomach itself. And then we already talked about gastrin from the G cells. Your stomach also has histamine, and that histamine basically works the same way as gastrin does, which is basically to increase the production of digestive enzymes, of pepsinogen as well as hydrochloric acid. Okay, so basically just food stretching the stomach signals the release of more digestive enzymes. And then finally, once you start moving some of that chyme into the small intestine, we call that the intestinal phase. And basically that's going to cause secretin, GIP, and something called CCK to basically inhibit gastric secretions and motility while the duodenum, that first part of the small intestine, processes the chyme. So basically you're releasing secretin, GIP, and CCK, and that's going to tell the stomach, all right, whoa, stop secreting digestive juices. So you'll notice in this image there is no digestive enzymes being produced. So again, in the duodenum, because now we're moving on to the intestine. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here. We're moving on to the intestines, and they don't have that nice protective mucus lining. Oh, excuse me. They do not have that nice protective mucus lining, so you can't have very acidic things in the intestines because you will literally burn a hole in them. So basically, when food, or chyme, I should say, enters into that small intestine, that acid is very quickly neutralized. Okay, and it's brought back up to like a fairly neutral pH. Okay, and then basically again it'll send signals to the stomach saying, all right, you don't need any more digestive enzymes. Just kind of keep smushing the food around. You've made plenty. We've got to basically neutralize this because now we're moving into the intestine. Okay. Vomiting, I think we've all had this joy once or twice in our lives, if not more. Many different things can cause you to throw up. So you've eaten too much, excessive stretching of the stomach. Psychological stimuli. I'm sure we've all probably had the experience where someone has said something to us, or you've seen something or heard something, and it makes you sick to your stomach. I'm sure you've also at least seen it in TV if you haven't experienced it, where it's like sort of like the typical, like, you know, like a rookie cop comes upon a murder scene and he's like, "Whoa," and he just throws up, right? It's a psychological stimulus. Or some type of irritant. Maybe you've eaten bad food, right? That's a classic, causes you to throw up. The centers in the brain that cause you to throw up are in the medulla. So basically, when you're retching, that's, you know, that's sort of like that kind of thing. The lower esophageal sphincter relaxes, and the stomach and the duodenum are spastically contracting. And then when you actually vomit, it's a very strong contraction that forces, you know, the upper esophageal sphincter to open and basically forces food, you know, through the esophagus and out through the mouth. Something that I mentioned in 201 that is important here as well. Please note that the vomiting center is in the medulla, so it's a lower brainstem brain region, which means that you do not need to be conscious for your body to tell you to throw up. This is one of the things that makes this so dangerous for people who have passed out either due to concussions or from drinking too much or any kind of drug kind of overdose, because they can throw up in their sleep or while they're passed out and then basically aspirate or choke on their own vomit. Okay. So to give you an idea what an ulcer looks like, so this is nice and healthy mucosa, and you can see it's red, inflamed, right? It's even pussy in this area, so that's an ulcer. Basically, the acids are burning through the mucosal lining. These two gentlemen, I forget who's who. I think this is Barry Marshall. I think that's Robin Warren, but maybe it's backwards. I forget. They prove that H. pylori caused most of the ulcers. So here you can see H. pylori. Here are the epithelial cells of the stomach, nice protective mucus layer. So they actually can corkscrew themselves into there and basically destroys the mucus-producing cells, and then you lose that nice protective mucus, causing an ulcer. Now, there's a great story about this. So I forget which one it was, which one of these two gentlemen it was, but basically the story is he was researching this, and I mean it's not that long ago that, you know, it was, people believed that ulcers were caused by stress, right? And that's what they thought it was. And he's like, yeah, but, you know, there's plenty of people that are, you know, stressed out that don't get ulcers, right? And or people that aren't stressed and do. So he was convinced that it was this H. pylori that was actually the cause of it. Well, people didn't believe him because pretty much we all have H. pylori in us, right? But not all of us have ulcers. And so doctors were like, no, it can't be, because how do you explain that? And, you know, he was pretty confident in his results, but he was so frustrated because like no one was listening to him. And they wouldn't even, I don't think they would even let him publish his papers. Like they were just like, no, this is garbage research. He was so mad that he had like a beaker full of H. pylori that he had been, you know, culturing, and he drank it himself, fully believing that, you know, in like a week or two, he'd start developing an ulcer. Well, like a couple hours later, he's like doubled over in pain. And his wife walks in and she's like, what are you doing? He's like, I drank, you know, the beaker of H. pylori. And she's like, oh my God, you're an idiot. Rushes him to like the hospital. And sure enough, you know, they, you know, I guess he's like, no, you gotta culture my stomach, you know, juices. You gotta find out what's in there. So they do, and they found that sure enough that this H. pylori caused the ulcer, this, you know, ulcer to start in his stomach. So that really got everyone's attention for obvious reasons, and that's how he got to prove that, yeah, he was right, that it's the H. pylori that causes ulcers. So now when people have ulcers, instead of just giving them like Pepto-Bismol, you know, you just give them some antibiotics to kill off the H. pylori. Okay. If you're interested, here's a video of a gastric bypass surgery. You can kind of see it here. So what they basically do is they staple off a small bit of the stomach, right? This little stomach pouch. They actually reroute the intestine. So they basically they cut the intestine there, they kind of sew it shut. And then they reroute it up to that little bit. And then they also make a opening here so any other digestive enzymes, because digestive enzymes from the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder are coming in at this area, so those can still trickle down to here. But anyway, you can kind of take a look at that video of how that's actually done. It's kind of neat. All right, we'll stop there. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.